Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to Social Confoes. I'm your host Diego, together with my co-host Sean-Luc. Sean-Luc, how is it going today?
Whoa, this has been a difficult day. I just said to our to our guest for today that we had a nationwide blackout for the internet because the internet wasn't working properly. So, but luckily it's good enough to do social confos. So we're excited to be back, and I think we're gonna have a streak of really interesting guests. And our guest for today gets to kick it off. And yeah, let's get straight into it.
Sure. So who are we having today and what's the topic of the day?
Okay, so today we're having as a guest Karis Meier. Karis is an awesome woman. She's a mother and she's a wife and mother of four. She has a lot of interests, including, of course, her family, like I just mentioned, but also the church is very important to her. But also writing, counseling, and soccer. I definitely want to talk a little bit about soccer during the end of today's show. But what we're really going to talk about is how to deal with chronic illness and how to find strength. And Karis is going to share with us how she found her strength. And hopefully it helps us as well, not just people listening in or tuning in, but that we can help spread the word. So without further ado, let's introduce our guest. Karis, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
We're
Well,
glad to have you.
we're really glad to have you. And I was hoping that Diego could tell us a little bit more about the Northern Virginia experience, since he was just very well, not near, but near your state. But of course, we're interested knowing, like, you've lived in different places. So tell us a little bit about not necessarily how you ended up in Northern Virginia, but tell us a little bit more about living in Northern Virginia and also compared to other parts of the states.
Yeah, we have moved around a lot. We've moved, I think, 13 times in 16 years, so a lot of moves. Been everywhere from Alaska to Georgia, um, seen a lot of different states. But I think for both my husband and I, Northern Virginia has been probably our top place to live. And it's I think one of the main things is the diversity here. There is just people from everywhere you could ever imagine, and they're our neighbors. They're in our church, our children's school. Um, it's a huge blessing. I grew up living overseas, some like in Philippines and Singapore and Costa Rica, and so I have a heart for just lots of different people and
Wow.
international. And so to be living among lots of different nationalities and cultures and diversities is just a huge blessing to be a part of that. And everything is just so close. We came from last. We were in Washington State, which is, of course, on the far west coast, and everything there is very spread out. But here, everything is very close, so we can just drive. I mean, Maryland is like what 20 miles from us, so we can go to Maryland or DC. There's of course every museum you would ever want to go to or not want to go to, um, and yeah, the coast is nearby. Just a lot of fun things to do. Um, we love it here.
Yeah, I'm back, right? Okay. Yeah. So just to add to some context, what Sean-Luc was mentioning in the beginning, I was in the States like 2, 3 months
We can't hear you clearly, Diego. Unfortunately, we can't hear you clearly. We're gonna quickly take him out, see if he can reset. But Karis, you
Okay.
mentioned something interesting, because everything is nearby, and I think in Singapore it's even more dense, isn't it? So
Yes.
so for people like living in the U.S. or Europe, like what's Singapore like compared to living in the U.S.?
Oh, Singapore is amazing. You touched a, a very, that's just those years living there were the best years of my life. But it's yeah, I mean everything there is it's just built up on top of each other. So there's lots of high rises. It's extremely clean. It's very well run, but it's also very diverse. I mean, I went to a school growing up. I went to a school with like 65 different nationalities, and so again, a lot of diversity, a lot of just culture. So, but
Okay.
it
What's
was
your, is there something that you fondly remember? Is it like a food or something that you're saying like, hey, this is what I used to have when I was younger, which I would definitely recommend to others?
yes. So there's an Indian pancake that they would make. It's called like mortaba or something, but it's kind of a very thin pancake that they can, well I say pancake, but they can put meat inside of it, or savory, or make it sweet, and then dipping sauce with like curry sauce. That was definitely our favorite go-to in
Yeah, sounds a
Singapore.
lot like what we call a roti, what we call roti.
Roti.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
it's similar to
yeah,
that.
yeah. Awesome. That's pretty cool. Okay, so we moved all over the world, but there's of course a very important topic that we wanted to discuss today and create some more awareness about, which is chronic illness. And there are different
Hmm.
perceptions on what chronic illness is, and um, also living in all those different countries. How has that affected your life, or where did your chronic illness become an issue for you?
Yeah, so I was actually visiting some family in Pakistan almost, well, yeah, about 17 years ago now, and picked up some different parasites over there. And because of the situation I was in, living in Alaska, and at the time, it just took a long time to figure out what was going on with me. And so by that time, they had done a lot of internal damage. And so from that point on, and that was the same year I actually got married to my husband. But from that point on, I just had one thing after the other go wrong, a lot of organ failures, just a lot of chronic stomach and intestinal stuff. So for the last, yeah, it's been it's been 17 years that there's just been a lot of different things with my health that has just been really difficult.
I can imagine. Well, I can't, of course, feel the full scope of what you're dealing with. I only had one experience once, an internal bleeding, and for me it was, well, basically changing some parts of your life.
Hmm.
And I'm quickly gonna introduce it, and then you can also share with us like what are things that people often regret or take for granted. What are things people take for granted that people are not aware of, that don't have issues with these kind of illnesses?
Yeah, so many things. I mean, growing up, I was very athletic, and played, well, soccer was my favorite sport, but played a lot of different sports. And after I got sick, my body was a lot weaker, and so I couldn't play soccer like I used to. Couldn't run. I mean, I was a runner, and so that's one thing, is just not having energy to do extracurricular things. And I think just the feeling of well-being, the feeling of not being distracted by your body. I think, you know, after I became sick, and even to this day, I have different things. I have a nerve condition called neuropathy, where I have nerve pain and numbness and tingling. And so it's a constant distraction. Like I'm constantly distracted by my body. Whereas when you're healthy, you don't have to really think about it. You get hungry and you eat, you have to use the bathroom, but you're not you're not constantly like, I mean, if you ever had like a really bad headache or something, you can understand like it's hard to be focused when your body is screaming at you with something else. So that's another thing. For my personal issues with health, a lot of it is I have a lot of food restrictions. And so most times, when we go out to eat or we're at social events, I can't eat what everyone else is eating. And you don't realize how much food is such a big part of life. Like so many things revolve around food. And so before I got sick, I would just eat whatever I wanted to, didn't think about it. And I can't do that anymore. So I don't know. Those are a couple things that come to mind.
Yeah. So what food restriction threw you off the most? What food restriction was like, really? Do I have to let go of that now?
Well, for a time I had to give up coffee, and that was horrible. I can drink coffee now, but gluten was probably the hardest. I haven't been able to eat gluten for many years, so there are a lot of gluten-free foods, but it's not the same.
Okay, let's no. I quickly, before Diego asks a question, I want to dive into that one because I need your experience the next couple of weeks. Actually, I have a speaker coming over, international speaker for our conference, and I have to also make sure that it's gluten free. So, what is the secret to good gluten free food?
Read the label. That first of all, there are a lot of gluten-free foods now that they make, like gluten-free breads, gluten-free pasta, pizza. And so for people who need gluten-free, especially like have a very strict gluten sensitivity or allergy, I would just say read the label. Obviously, there's some foods that are naturally gluten-free, like vegetables and fruits and meats, but they even put it in like sauces and cheeses and different things. So you just have to be careful.
Could you briefly explain what gluten-free means? Because I've heard it's popped up the last few years more, right?
Yeah.
But
So
it's
gluten
kind
is
of,
a
yeah.
protein. Gluten is a protein in the wheat that needs to be. So gluten-free means you have to extract that from whatever the food is. So anything that's made with like flour, or oats or barley. There's several different grains that have gluten in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
so it's a specific protein within that's
in the
naturally
grain.
grown. Yeah, in grain specifically. Got it.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that makes some more sense. I missed the first part, but I'll let Jean-Luc pick it up, and I'm gonna keep listening and try
Yeah.
to interject.
So because I like I explained, I had an illness once. I had an internal bleeding, and I had to let go of caffeine. Or if I'm still allowed to use caffeine, but I'm only allowed to use caffeine on a full stomach. If it's on an empty stomach, it directly starts damaging. So for me, that's hard because I drink a lot of cola, and I don't drink coffee, but the cola part has been really hard on me. But I'm actually now on a 30-day water only drinks diet, which is really good on so many levels. But for me, it hasn't been chronic, and a lot of people suffer with situations that it it's part of their life forever. How why At what point did you find the solution or find the energy to overcome the struggles of having to bear with certain pains that you would have every day?
At what point did I overcome it, you ask?
Yeah, or what helps the most to overcome it?
Um, yeah, so I wouldn't say I have overcome it. I think it's a daily battle, but it's a daily choice too. I think with something that becomes chronic, and for me, I kept thinking, oh, I'm going to get better soon. I'm going to get better. This doctor will help me figure out what's going on. This doctor will help me. This doctor, this medication. And when it's something that it's so systemic, it kind of some people, one thing affects the other. And then, our bodies are just so complicated. And so if you treat one thing as something else, so it's just interesting to see how. So for me personally, it was a process of like accepting, wow, this is not going away. This is something I need to learn how to not just pretend that I'm okay. Because in the beginning, I think I just did a very, I'm more of an internal processor, and I don't share my pain very, I tend to hide, like, I don't stuff things a lot, but I don't share openly, like, oh, this is so hard. I would generally just keep it all in. But then I think after several years of that, I realized I really can't do this alone. I do need help, and I need to share with people how difficult this is. And so it was about 5 years ago that I really started to, even with my husband, just sharing with him how difficult things were on a daily basis. And I think that was part of the healing process, was being able to let in other people, let other people into the pain that I was experiencing, and receive comfort from others, receive help. I think too, some people, when there's when somebody says, oh, they have cancer, or they have a diagnosis, people are so willing to help and so willing to join in. But when things keep going on and on and on, and the illness doesn't go away, then you start to lose people, right? They get kind of like, I don't know what else to do with you, which is normal. I'm not saying anyone did anything wrong, but that's just kind of lose interest. And so I think for people with chronic illnesses, it can be very lonely, because you realize pretty soon, like, oh, nobody wants to hear that I'm having a bad day again, except but you have to figure out who those people are, right? You have to figure out who the people are who can handle it and who want to hear. Because I have a list of people that I call on the days where I really need help. I really need prayer. I really need someone to encourage me. And I'm so thankful for those people. So that's kind of, and of course in that too, I know I shared with you earlier just about my, my faith, I believe in Jesus, and that he is my best friend. He is always with me. And without having a hope of, a resurrected body, of going to heaven, and, this living in this body and this earth would be difficult if I didn't have an eternal perspective, thinking this is not where it ends. There's more to come. And that's really the hope that I live by every day.
Wow. Yeah. I understand that internal processing part, 'cause I'm kind of similar. Like, you kind of bottle it up before you start sharing. So I'm curious to know, like, when you started sharing, how did you start sharing? But what can I imagine, like, an interaction look like, especially with someone that, maybe you're not used to. Yeah, your husband is someone you can, lean into, but say someone, how do you find others or identify others, like what you could share on a longer timeline, as you said?
Yeah. So I think it was definitely a process for me. For me, I kind of hit a very, very low point. I had so many different things going on in my health. I ended up in the hospital for several days, and I was on a feeding tube and different things. And I, I think I just realized how much I was trying to hold it together. And I don't know if it was for myself or for my family, because at that point I had a couple kids, and I was very aware of how my illness affected my kids or affected my husband, or but I hit a point where I just realized, wow, this is too much for me to handle alone. And I was pretty good at putting on a smile and just, saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, and really not being fine. And so I think in the beginning, it was kind of more of a gush. Like I started I wouldn't say I had a breakdown, but I had like a release. Like I had to kind of get some of the baggaged emotions out. And that started with my husband and with my sisters. My sisters are probably my closest friends, and well, they are. And so it started there with people that I was really comfortable with, and then I started, just with people at church or others who asked me, "How are you doing?" And I would say, "Not very well," which I had never said in my life. I would always say, "Oh, I'm good. Things are
Uh,
fine."
And what was the response like? Was the response, what kind of a response did you expect then, like
Yeah,
when
so
you said that?
I think I expected like people to be let down or something, or but I think I received the opposite. I really felt a lot of love and compassion and acceptance. I saw people like have sorrow, and sadness for me, and but also just a lot of encouragement. I kind of felt like, oh, it's okay. I don't have to hold it all together. I don't have to be, I'm obviously I'm not perfect. No one is, but I think I felt like I had to be. That's kind of my personality, I guess. But yeah, it was a much better response than I thought. And at that point, and even looking back now, I kind of regret the years where I kept it in more when I shouldn't have. I mean, I'm not saying that we should just be like, to everyone, but there's a balance, right, that we all need to live in. And
I think it's
so,
also a process, and I feel like we underestimate, and that's why one of the reasons why we're excited to talk about this topic is because we often underestimate like how many people actually, well, not the same kind of chronic illnesses, but how many people deal with it and how many people are afraid to talk about it. And you mentioned that it's hard to find people to talk with. You don't know, you don't want to be a burden. I think that's something
mhm.
that you haven't said directly, but that's something that first comes to mind, like, hey, I don't want to like push my problems towards others.
Yeah.
But finding different people is hard. And you also mentioned faith and how faith plays a role into it. So did you grow up religiously, and did it change, or is there something that happened that made you realize how much you could rely on faith to make it easier to talk with others but also with yourself about it?
Hmm. Yeah. So I did grow up in a Christian home, and I mean, my parents are missionaries, so that they are both strong Christians. But it wasn't until my after my freshman year of college where I kind of made it my own. I think growing up I was more just um I mean, I always believed in God, but I felt like it was more following rules than um a life-giving relationship that I I began to develop in my probably early 20s, in college, and then thereafter it just continued to grow. And I'm so thankful for that, because it was shortly after that where um, I got sick, and I was already in I already had a strong relationship with the Lord. Um, and so I do remember in those early years, like he was the one that I always turned to first, and he still is. But I think I've learned how to um, include other people in that group of people that I can rely on and turn to, and trust, with hard things.
So before we go to like, no, I wouldn't say overcoming because you're very clear on that. It's you're working with it every day, but we do have some questions. Actually, one of the questions is from somebody tuning in, and Shamil is asking, when cooking as a mother, do you have to cook separately for you and your family, or
Mhm.
have they kind of included themselves into your diet?
No, they haven't. Sometimes I'll make things that we all can eat, but most nights, yes. excellent question, and it is very hard because I try to cook healthy and, you know, good for my family, but then also have to cook for myself. And so yes, it does take a little extra work, a little extra effort. Um, so, but my
So
children are very, that's, I think that leads me to a point where, for our kids who watch us, for people who are struggling with something, I think throughout this whole thing, the hardest thing for me was, I guess still is how my kids are going to be affected, because some days it's really hard, and they have to watch me struggle. They've had to watch me go in and out of the hospital. I've seen them many nights crying because they're anxious for me. They're concerned, is mommy going to be okay? You know, but they are some of the most compassionate kids because they see pain and they know how to respond. They know how they're aware of people's needs. Um, when my kids see someone who's sick, they say, "Can we go pray for them?" So
oh,
I,
that's sweet.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I think sometimes we're afraid of how our kids are going to be affected by a negative thing, but if we guard them in the right way and help them through it, they can also grow a lot through it. So anyway, just wanted to share that.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, like my kids always wanna when they're in church, they wanna or we visit the church outside. They also always want to light a candle, like for somebody they know that recently passed away, but that's already kind of after the person passed away. So having
Hmm.
your children say that they want to pray for somebody who's feeling ill or has a certain pain, that's just such an awesome gesture. And thanks for sharing because that was actually one of my questions. Are there like things that routines or things that your children did pick up? So not the eating because probably they like different foods as well, but are there other things where they kind of have become infested more with you because of the illness?
Hmm. Yeah, I think so my about 5 years ago is when I really felt called to start writing. I hadn't done much writing before that, and it was actually my son, so my 12-year-old now. He was like, "Mom, you should write a book. You should make this in the book." And I was like, "No, I'm not going to write a book." And but over the years, he's just kept at it. You're going to write a book, Mom. You're going to write a book. You're going to write a book. And so he's kind of been my biggest fan. And then I did write a book. So um, I think they have, yeah, they've really journeyed and been an encouragement too. Some days I think I'm so thankful for my kids because the joy that kids bring and the motivation, for me some days is my kids. I feel, oh, I'm too tired, I'm too sick, I don't want to get out of bed, but my kids need me, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this for the kids, and oftentimes I share with them, honestly, I'm having a hard day, but it's okay because God helps us, so I have tried to be, especially in the last few years and as they're getting a little bit older, to be honest with them and to show them how to walk through something that's hard, because we're all going to go through hard things in life and they are too. And sometimes we try to guard our kids from everything, and that's not bad because we don't want them to be exposed to things they shouldn't too early, but also the reality of our world is that there are going to be hard things. And um, so I don't know if I answered the question you asked, but
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because basically, your oldest one was kind of also your biggest fan and motivation to do. So to actually produce the book. So before we dive really into to the book itself, like you mentioned, your writing journey started like 5 years ago. So tell us a little bit how it started. Do you remember your very first piece of content that you wrote down? What it was?
Before you go
Um,
into that
mhm.
one, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I am curious when um, your kid prompted you to write that book, like what was it that like what did he say, or like why a book? Why in that format? Why a book or a
Why not
story
a
in book
YouTube
format?
video,
Why
for
not?
instance?
Yeah, like what was so attractive or enticing about words, written words for them?
Well, I am not sure about that. I will tell you that, um, well, I'll just tell you the honest story of how it happened. It was about 5 years ago, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I felt like the Lord, like God was, I mean, it wasn't like an audible voice, but I felt like God was saying, just start writing about your journey, about, what I'm teaching you through this and the struggle. And at the time, I, um, didn't want to. And so for a couple weeks, but it was very clear, I felt very clear, and it just kept pressing on my heart, like, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're supposed to do. Um, so I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks after that, I finally sat down at the computer and just started writing. And I actually started writing about how obedience is not always easy. When we are called to do something, it's often very difficult, and it's not always clear what it is. Because for me at that point, that was about that time when things were going really, really bad. It was probably the hardest and most difficult portion of our lives, both with jobs and marriage and my health and different things. And so I was thinking, what do I have to write about? Like, I have nothing good to write about right now. But I think it was because I was able to start then. And so I just started writing. I just started writing whatever was on my heart that day. And I just kept a journal on my computer. And then a couple years later, and Diego, I'm getting to your question. A couple years later, I started a blog, and then a Facebook group for people who were suffering in different ways. So my kids knew I was writing, right? I would sit down at the computer, and they'd be like, "Mom, what are you doing?" Because I wasn't on the computer a lot. I just didn't do that a lot. And so they would ask me, and so I would tell them what I was writing. And sometimes my son would read what I was writing. "Oh, are you writing about me today?" And I'm like, "Yeah," because he'd see my name, he'd see his name on there. So then he was like, "Well, you're going to write a book." And so it was by him, like, seeing me writing, writing on the computer. And honestly, at that point, I laughed. I was like, "No, there's no way. This is not going to be a book. This is probably just for my own sake, like my own therapy writing." Um, so anyway, so over the years, he kept saying that, and I kept thinking, no, it's not going to happen. But then at the beginning of the year, um, I, it just kind of hit me like, yeah, I have a lot of content. And several people from the blogs, told me how much it was blessing them. And I was like, well, this could be a book. And so that's how it
It's
started.
it's funny how you mentioned it, saying like, listen, this is gonna be it's for me. And I think we often underestimate as people that when we're working on ourselves and we're doing something for ourselves, others get inspired by it. I think that's one of the things that we take for granted, that when we're working on ourselves and finding solutions for ourselves, there are other people with similar struggles that are just like, hey, this is so beautiful that you're talking about this. And we can relate, and we're grateful that somebody is willing to share the experience, because we all keep it kind of bottled up. What I was really interested in is, you mentioned the time frame a couple of times already. So I was wondering if that period around where you started was somewhat related to the birth of your third child. Like, was it right before or right after?
Yeah, so it was shortly after she was born. And my husband was he was traveling for work. He was gone more than he was home, and so I had 3 kids, and that's when I started having a lot of nerve problems also. So there was a lot of different things going on at the same time. And she also, my third child was, she cried for pretty much the first year of her life. So I was under a lot of stress with her also. So yeah, there was just a lot of different life stuff going on that was a lot of pressure.
Yeah, no, because you mentioned it, and I was like, yeah, I can, like with my wife, we have 2 only, so I can imagine 3 being even more, even harder. But we also mentioned complete change in dynamic. Like it's like an extra person in your family. And for me, especially being an only child, like it's like every time there's like a piece of your life that's kind of being taken from you, and what you get in return is so much more, but you do have to find a new way to structure your life. So I find that really interesting, and we talked about the food part, but also from a perspective from a mother with 4 children, and a wife and mother for 4 children, like how do you have tips for like first time parents, and tips that you would like to share, like what are some tips and tricks which are definitely useful when you're getting children?
Yes. Oh, I could talk about this all day. But one, I think the most valuable thing is having one-on-one times with your kids. So having 4 kids, it's definitely more challenging, and I can't do it every day. But even sitting down with one child, doing what they want to do for like 15, 30 minutes is invaluable. I noticed such a difference in the children when I spend that quality time with them, giving them my undivided attention. They're completely different children. They feel valued, loved. And so that's something I've been doing with them since they were, you know, infants. And still, I mean, I can't do it with them every day now with older ones when they're in school, but we'll try to do a couple times a week where I'll just play a game with them or ask them, what do you want to do? What do you want to do for one-on-one time? And they have lists of things that they choose from. But that's definitely probably one of the top things that I would say is,
Awesome tip.
yeah. Let's see what else. Oh, I think, reading with kids is reading like valuable, I mean, stuff that you can talk about and grow together with is also, I mean, a lot of times we read devotions after a meal, and then we'll talk about it, or we'll read about something that's going on in the world, and pray together as a family. We have a map up on our wall, and often, talk about different countries and what's going on in the world. Because I think for kids, especially kids who are maybe more raised in an environment where it's more sheltered, it's so good for them to be exposed to, what's going on in the world, and realize how blessed they are. And so I guess that's something else.
So now that you mentioned that, actually, before we dive, for me, this is the last question. Maybe Diego has another one before we dive into the book. But now I do want to know, what's your favorite book?
Oh, man.
Either children's or adults. You can split it up if you want to.
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. Besides the Bible, because I would say the Bible's my favorite book, of course. But I love the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. I love all those books. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, we know it.
I know
Okay.
the
I haven't
movie.
read them. I have to be honest. I haven't read them,
I
but
know the
I'm
movies and
I'm
the
familiar. I'm familiar.
cartoons.
Oh, the
Yeah.
books
So
the books are so good. They're good for kids and they're so deep that they're so good for adults. I mean, I've
are
read
they
them just
better than the movies?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
And we do have to do the follow-up question. What's your favorite Bible story?
Well, I'll just say the first one that came to mind was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because that's the one where the king tells them to bow down to the statue, and they say no, and they said, the king says, I'm gonna throw you into the fiery furnace, and they said, no, it doesn't matter. Like God can deliver us, he will deliver us, and even if he doesn't deliver us, we're not going to bow down, and of course God rescues them in the fire. But I just love that statement that they believed God could, that he would, but even if he didn't, they wouldn't stop believing. And I think that is such, a thing that we need to learn, that just because somebody, sometimes we treat God like a vending machine. We're like, we pray and we're like, give me this, or do the good works and give me this. And then when he doesn't give it to us, then we stop believing. But that's not who God is. That's not how God works. So I love their statement of faith, and, doesn't matter. Even if he doesn't, we'll still do this.
So awesome. I just want to go to the book now because it's been a
Okay.
process. It's been a process of 5 years, and your son said you're gonna write a book, and now it's actually there. So how did the actual process start? How did you decide, like, I'm going to do this and I'm gonna share my story?
So yeah, I think it was, I want to say February. I just, it was kind of just a very strong, I don't know. It just became a very strong desire out of nowhere. I felt like, I was like, I need to write a book. And so I just started looking. I had no experience. Like I didn't know the first thing about publishing. So I just started looking up online, like how to publish a book, how to write a book, how to start writing a book, and just trying to collect all the
Spending
information
hours
I
on
could.
hours on Google.
Yeah. And that's where I came across, the self-publishing school, and was like, oh, this looks like something, something good. Like somebody to help me get through the process of it. And so listen to some different talks, and some different podcasts, and that's where I started. And so then I signed up with them and started with my mind map, started creating all the different ideas. And because I had written so much over the years, I mean, I probably had almost 100 pages, full pages on the computer written out. So I just read through that, made the outlines, started cutting and pasting, and then, and it's hard because I stay home with the kids. So I just would have to write 30 minutes here, 10 minutes here, 20 minutes here. My husband's like, how did you do anything? Because he can't do anything when he's with the kids. He's only can keep them alive. So he's like, I don't know how you
Same
wrote a
here.
book.
Same here. I always say, whenever I'm with them, they're completely happy. When their mother comes home, they're completely happy. But it's I can only focus on this. There's nothing else that gets done. So I completely understand that one. Okay.
So
But from the, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
no. So that's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
that was just it. I just had to, I just tried to make every moment that I could and put in some more time, write some more words, put it together. And it was about a process of about 8 months, I guess.
On that process, so you've been writing before you started the book. You've been writing blog posts already and
Mhm.
creating content online. How has that, that experience of writing something online where you have, it's kind of a different type of writing, right? Or a different type of audience, I would imagine. How did that translate into writing for a book? And did you take any content you've written online and converted it into content for the book, for example?
Yeah. Yes, I did take content from what I've written already online. And I think, one of the things was it boosted my confidence because I never considered myself a writer. I wouldn't consider I mean, I think I can write okay, but I never really thought, oh, I'm a writer, I'm an author, or whatever. But getting feedback from people, and I think one of the main things that I heard from people was, it is so nice to have somebody who is writing in the middle of something that is difficult, because it's so easy to write for something after it's done, right? When we've gotten the victory, when we had the healing, when we've got whatever, the big aha, whatever it is. And for me, I hadn't, I would, I'm, is a very vulnerable place of writing because I'm still going through it. There was a lot of
You
days
don't know
where my
what's going to
writing was
happen,
just,
right?
yeah,
So
I didn't know what's
you're
going
in
to
the
happen.
process.
So I think just having people um, encourage me and say thank you for writing from this place, um, it gave me confidence to say, okay, well, even if this isn't necessarily comfortable for me, it's a good thing to do, and I was enjoying it too. I did enjoy. I'm more of a processor in my writing, like writing than talking. So for me, writing was helpful for me even to understand myself and what was going on.
I'm curious, how would you describe good writing? Because as you said, you don't consider yourself really a writer, but from your perspective, going through that process, how would you, or what would you consider good writing? How would you describe that?
Well, I am a very, very picky reader. So I often start books, and by like probably the like third or fourth paragraph, I can tell you if it's good or not. Cause I'm very, I enjoy rich language, which is why I enjoy older books more, because there's a lot, the vocabulary is much better, the writing's better. Um, and so I think I have a high standard for for writing personally. And so I was like, I don't know if I measure up to that. But for me, my writing came, um, it felt like it came from more of a place of inspiration. For me, it was more like I felt at times kind of like compelled, like I need to write this. I need to get this out. It was so it when I wrote it, it wasn't like I'm going to write down and just think about what I'm going to write today. It was more like, this is happening. I need to get this down on paper. So that was more my writing experience. Whereas some people, they can sit down and they can like formulate in their mind, like, you know, or like people who come up with fiction books, that's incredible. I can't even fathom that. But it's just interesting how different people have different experiences in writing, and mine wasn't. I don't think it's the traditional type of writing, I guess.
So feel free to elaborate a little bit on that, because what was your approach? Did you look back at things you have written like over the past years, or were there certain parts in the book like where you were like, wait, I wrote about that already. I'm gonna go back into my stash to see what I wrote and how I can like recycle that content, or was it completely newly written, completely newly written?
Yeah, so I think I sometimes, honestly, I would go back and be like, "Wow, did I write that?" It was kind of surprising to me that I wrote it, and I've had several people tell me, um, that that they felt like God speaking to them through the words that I was writing, and I do use a lot of scripture in my writing. I do use a lot of stories and different things. So I don't know. Does that answer your question? Maybe I didn't understand your question very well.
Yeah, so did you include like old blogs that you wrote in the book or portions of old blogs that you wrote in the book as well?
Yes, I did. I portions of them. I didn't put the whole thing in usually, but maybe certain stories, maybe a certain illustrations, some things like that.
Diego, are you ready for some over overrated, underrated? Or do you
Before
have
we go
other
into that, I
questions?
have
Okay, go
a
ahead.
final question. Tying this back in your journey and, having a chronic illness and especially getting this penned down or like typed down in word format, like how far do you plan ahead? Or because I can imagine it's a daily struggle. So how far can you plan ahead for yourself? Like what's that like for you when you like with the book, for
Do you,
example, like do you
with a book.
but in general, I just try to narrow it down to get a sense of how planning is for you.
Hmm. I think for me, I really try to take things a day at a time. Sometimes just an hour at a time. Honestly, it's hard for me to think a lot like far into the future. Of course, for planning purposes, like for the kids and for more logistical things, that's fine. Um, and I try to set goals. Even with the book, I would set goals. Trying to have this completed by this date. But I think also just having a lot of grace, having um, creating space for days where I'm not able to get it done, and realizing that that's okay. It's not a failure. It's not. I think I tend to. Um, I don't like to fail at things, and so for me, getting over, okay, that's okay. Wasn't able to get everything I needed to done, but that's okay. It's tomorrow's another day. And but yeah, I think I really try to live one day at a time and not worry too much about tomorrow.
No, yeah, guess that's makes some sense because you don't know what's going to happen, right? So you need to make the best possible with every day, and yeah. Jean-Luc, whenever you're
Yeah,
ready.
so Karis, we want to close it off a little bit on a light side. So we're
All
gonna
right.
do something fun. It's gonna be overrated, underrated. We're just gonna drop a topic for you, and you get to decide whether you feel it's underrated or overrated. And the best part is, if you want to elaborate on it, you're allowed to elaborate on it. If you feel like I
Okay.
just want to say overrated or underrated or properly rated, it's totally fine as well. Since I'm the one instigating this today, I will be the first one to start off. So I wanted to ask you, Costa Rica as a travel destination, is it underrated or overrated?
Underrated. Underrated. It is amazingly beautiful there. Amazingly. And you have everything so close. You got the beaches, you got the mountains, the rainforests, and everything is pretty cheap. And it's pretty easy to travel. So I would it's we've been trying I've been trying to get my husband to go there for years, and hopefully someday soon we'll be able to go, because I've been telling him about it for so long, and he's always like, oh man, I can't wait to get there because you talk about it so much. So yeah, I'm a
Oh,
big
so
fan of Costa Rica.
you went there without him.
I live I live
Oh,
there for, yeah, I live,
ah,
yeah.
got it. All right, for me, learning about history, underrated or overrated?
Oh, I I want to say underrated again. I think we can learn so much from history. And if we actually learned from it, we probably wouldn't make as many mistakes as we are now. So I would say underrated.
That's smart. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so before I ask my next overrated, underrated, how heavily involved are you still in watching and following soccer in the U.S.?
I wish my son was here. My 12-year-old is a soccer fanatic. He probably knows every team and every player, out there. Of course, Messi is his favorite. We still watch a lot of soccer in our home. We follow, mostly we follow the European teams, but also the MLS is
Yeah.
probably
So
what we
let's keep it easy. The MLS, is the MLS overrated or underrated?
watch. Compared to the rest of the world, probably overrated. Because let's just face it, most other countries play soccer a lot better than in America and in the United States. I mean, but it's up and coming. It's up and coming.
Is there any point that men's soccer will equal the quality of women's soccer in the U.S.?
No, not as long as the American football and baseball and the other boring sports are around.
Okay.
I learned to play soccer in Costa Rica. Well, not learned to, but I got really into it there. I loved it. That was definitely a highlight.
Well, that's Latin America for you.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Harry Potter, overrated or underrated?
I'm gonna say overrated. I watched the movies and read some of the books, but I don't. Yeah, I wasn't too impressed.
It's fine. It's fine. We've gotten two overrated and two underrated, so it's perfectly balanced right now. We're closing down on the hour mark. So, Karis, we have to ask you, what's next for Karis? What are the next steps? Are you planning to write another book, or is there something specific that you would love to share?
I do think there's another book coming. I don't know when or what it's going to be yet, but I do feel that kind of that intuition that's probably coming. For now, so the book is launched October 25th, 2 weeks, and yeah, so I'm just going to see where that takes me. I don't. I honestly don't know what is next, but God does. So I guess we'll
Well,
just.
next is the book launch. I got a little bit ahead of myself. Sorry for that,
Yeah,
but I think next is the book launch. So if people
yeah,
are interested, they wanna know more about your book. They want to order your book. They want to be on the mailing list. How can they reach out to you, or where can they pre-order their copy? And tell a little
yes,
bit more as well about the book and what it's called, and kind of a synopsis as well.
sure. So the book is called "Suffering Redeemed: Finding Strength to Endure, Purpose in Pain, and Hope for Tomorrow." And it's really so I share some parts of my story in it. And stories throughout, but also it's it's a it's a guide for walking through suffering and for finding how to keep going really when life feels too hard. I have a lot of scripture in there, but also a lot of just practical tools for day to day living, how to take care of ourselves holistically. I think spirit and our soul and our mind, our emotions, body. There's so many parts of us that we need to care for, and so part of a couple of chapters about that, and then also how we can. The redeemed part is how God can use it in our lives and in the lives of others too, for good. Really, I think there's a lot of good that can come out of suffering. Many people, and myself included, I think we just try to avoid suffering at all costs, and that's natural. But there's also a lot of gifts that we can be given in suffering, and wisdom that comes, growth that comes, a lot of inner work that can be done if we are willing to do that. And also just opening up our eyes to see other people and what they're struggling with. And I think through my journey, I'm also a counselor. And I think if I haven't suffered so much myself, I probably wouldn't be as compassionate and really open to hearing other people's pain, because it really, it just creates a lot of empathy when you have gone through something really hard, and just makes you want to love other people more. So that's a little bit about the book. You can find it. So my website is karismeier.com. So it's just my name, KarisMeier.com. And the book, like I said, comes out October 25th, and it'll be on Amazon at the beginning, and then it will go out to bookstores and libraries and others after that.
So we quickly popped up the website, karismeier.com. I think if you go to the website, you can actually subscribe to a newsletter.
Yep.
Is that correct? So
Yep.
if you want to get more information, you can get that as well. And on October 25th, your book will be live on Amazon. Are you excited?
I'm excited. Yeah, I'm excited. I think I've been so tunnel vision trying to get it done. But the other day I was like, oh my gosh, I just wrote a book. So I am excited. Yeah.
I've seen that a lot actually, when writers or when people bring out a book, they're so tunnel vision that when it's time to publish, they don't even realize oh, it's there. Yeah, it's kind of very strange to see, but interesting nonetheless. So we will be looking forward to that, and appreciate you coming on, sharing your story here with us, and also about the book. So we wish you all the best with that, with the book launch especially.
Thank you.
Jean-Luc?
Thank you both.
Yeah,
Before
it was
I
really a
get cut off
pleasure.
again.
Yeah, I'm really happy that we got to talk a little bit as well, because it was kind of eye-opening for us as well, or for me as well, to look at it from a different perspective. I hope the book also finds reaches people that are struggling, that do believe in faith, that like scriptures as well. I think for people that like scriptures in general, it will definitely be a book that they want to have in their collection as well. And we also quickly, from our viewers, want to thank you for joining in, and wish you and your family strength and love. So thank you so much for being part of Social Confoes. Good luck with the book launch. We look forward to October 25th, and we were excited to have you. So thanks again. And for those
Thank you.
who are, you're welcome. And for those who are listening in or listening on streaming platforms, thank you for listening as well. Thank you for watching Social Confoes. We'll be back here next week, and actually also same time. Bye bye.